A bleak landscape, a horizon, a lone cowboy. Is he good or bad? An outlaw or a marshal? The image of a lone cowboy in the desert is as American as apple pie, Manifest Destiny, and Cranch. Except, maybe it's not. Now, while Western films find their origin in dime novels about cowboys and Indians, the Western is more influenced by Japanese cinema than you might think. I'm not saying that Clint Eastwood and Sergio Leone had waifu body pillows and cosplayed as cowboy bebop characters at anime conventions, but you cannot deny Japan's influence on American Westerns. You might have been thrown into a loop while watching the second season of Westworld when a handful of the characters found themselves in medieval Japan. You might have thought that the filmmakers were combining two completely different genres, two genres that have almost nothing to do with each other. Well, if you thought that, you were wrong. Samurai and Western films have an interlocked cinematic history, with Westerns inspiring samurais and vice versa. To start, I'm going to use the most obvious example, Yojimbo and a Fistful of Dollars. In 1961, Kurosawa released a samurai classic, Yojimbo. It follows a cunning ronin, played by Toshiro Mifune, who plays two gangs against each other for his own personal profit. In 1964, Sergio Leone released an almost scene-for-scene remake of Yojimbo for his own personal profit. But he couldn't have just stolen the movie though, right? Italians and Spanish are good people, who aren't known for stealing anything. But before you get mad at Leone for copying Kurosawa's homework, just know that Kurosawa and his fellow Yojimbo scribe, Haruzo Kikushima, sued the production for a breach of copyright. They won, and were awarded 15% of the film's worldwide gross and the exclusive distribution rights for Japan. The deal was so sweet that they made more money off of A Fistful of Dollars than they did from Yojimbo. But Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars weren't made in a vacuum. It wasn't like Kurosawa had never seen a Western before, but Leone found it coincidentally easy to adapt Yojimbo into the Western genre. Kurosawa loved Occidental forms of storytelling, from classic Hollywood movies to Shakespeare. Being a Japanese man obsessed with everything Western, you might say that Kurosawa was the antithesis of a weeb. His Western-style influences ran deeper than just cowboy films, as he also made Shakespearean adaptations in film noirs. But that's for another video. We might take a globalized culture for granted now in 2019, but in the mid-20th century, that was something completely new. Before World War II, samurai films and benshi, a kind of silent film where a presenter would narrate the film in the cinema, were all the rage. Once World War II commenced, however, all films needed to showcase the greatness of the emperor. It's definitely not fair to think that Japan was the only country making propaganda films, but I find one of the restrictions of these propaganda films interesting. Filmmakers were told they couldn't exaggerate the cruelties of war with overly realistic depictions. Blood and guts weren't exactly allowed in American films either, but the contradictory nature of this quote is striking. Don't show the realistic horrors of war, please, because that is hyperbole, and nothing close to reality. Not to spoil anything, but Japan lost. To ensure the empire would never rise again, the US demilitarized Japan, and, with the help of Hollywood, used American films to change Japanese culture. Over 600 films were shown to the Japanese populace in order to promote the American way of life. Studios also flooded their films in war-torn Western European nations. You know, depending upon how you view history, you could see World War II as a bloody ploy for movie studios to internationally showcase their films. The influx of American films into Japanese movie theaters no doubt affected Japan's own cinema. I might have made the relationship look parasitic earlier in the video, but in reality it was much more symbiotic. It was sort of a rapport between the East and the West, but I can't lie that American studios loved to remake Japanese films. Toho would make movies like Seven Samurai and The Hidden Fortress, and then Americans would make The Magnificent Seven and Star Wars. But isn't imitation the highest form of flattery? Maybe that's why Disney loves to remake its own films. But it's not enough to just say there's a connection because films were remade in other countries. Samurai and cowboy films share similar structures, settings, themes, and characters. There is a reason why it's so easy to turn a samurai into a cowboy. They both are essentially a form of the knight-errant story, which is a medieval genre about a knight traveling the world in pursuit of adventures in order to prove his chivalric values. In Japan, this kind of story is called musha shugyo. So let's analyze the traits that both genres share. Both follow a loner or a group of wanderers. Both feature generally stoic protagonists. Both showcase protagonists with a certain code of morals and honor. Their morals may not coincide with standard law and may also conflict with it. The conflict often arises out of another character, the antagonist, living by a different code or no code at all. In The Sword of Doom, Rhinosuke lives by a definite code of honor, even if his actions make him more of a villain. Butch Cassidy robs banks, but doesn't kill. The protagonists are often skilled in combat, almost always to an unrealistic extent, samurai with their swords and cowboys with their guns. The setting is almost never the home of the heroes. Instead, the films open with the wandering hero and end with the hero returning to wander. In the classic Western case, the cowboy rides off into the sunset. The landscape is a character, whether it's the arid, vast deserts of the American Southwest or the lush mountain villages of Japan. They often deal with themes of modernization and justice in lawless or oppressive societies. Or sometimes, they focus on enacting true justice outside the confines of the law. In High Plains Drifter, the stranger turns an entire town into hell on earth in order to punish the residents for a heinous crime, serving as an allegory for the state of California. Now, this isn't the case for every Western or samurai film, but the protagonists are less like regular people and more like mythic heroes. Suku is like an unstoppable demon. I mean, his first name literally means dragon. The man with no name, and almost every samurai Toshiro Mifune plays, feels like violent forces of nature. The stranger in High Plains Drifter is quite literally a vengeful spirit. This isn't the case of mythic characters in ordinary tales. Westerns tell the genesis story of modern America, and samurai films serve as a form of modern Japanese mythos. Not to mention that the stories often feel like snippets of these characters' lives. Each film is just one adventure, but there's a sense that there are infinite adventures before and after what we see on screen. It's similar to how we read myths about Greek and Roman heroes. Myths are no longer orally passed down generations, but are instead projected onto the silver screen to the size of gods for all to witness. Not every samurai lives in the Edo period of Japan, and not every cowboy exists in 1880s Arizona. There are many cases in which the classical Western or samurai hero finds themselves in a completely different setting. The most obvious example is Jim Jarmusch's Ghost Dog, The Way of the Samurai, where Forrest Whitaker plays as a hitman who fancies himself a samurai. You can trace its influence back to Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Samurai, which again is a film about a hitman, French this time, who lives by a samurai code. And then Le Samurai was effectively remade as Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive. Well, not remade, but it did heavily influence the film. All three of these films contain the structure and archetypal characters of westerns and samurai films, but in modern urban settings. As a last small example, I want to take a look at Terrence Young's 1971 film Red Sun. The film stars Toshiro Mifune, Charles Bronson, Ursula Andress, and Alain Delon. What's interesting is that Mifune starred in Seven Samurai, and Bronson starred in the remake, The Magnificent Seven. Delon, of course, is known for his leading role in Le Samurai, and Andress was the famous honey writer from Dr. No, although I don't know how that factors into westerns. The plot sees them hunting down a gang that stole an ancient Japanese sword and was intended as a gift from Japan to the US. The film itself is a statement on the relationship between samurais and cowboys, seamlessly blending the two together for an adventure in the West, even though it might have been shot in Spain by a French company and its director was British. So hopefully, after this video, you can pop on a Kurosawa or Kobayashi film and watch them with newfound appreciation. Or maybe you'll notice the Eastern influences in one of your favorite Westerns. Films aren't made in a vacuum. And maybe the case of the Cowboys and the Samurais show how we, as people, have universal stories that transcend cultures.